My name's Nick Samios. I'm the fund manager at Hermes Capital. We operate Australia-wide in all sorts of industries, and we like putting these panels together to have a chat with experts to try and share a bit of expertise and to help to understand what's going on in the marketplace. And it's a marketplace that we're all of us in this room operating. I would like to start off by asking our panellists one by one. Our topic is doing business in Victoria. I mean, everybody knows Victoria is a tough place to do business. We operate Australia-wide. It's almost impossible for us to get a deal in WA. WA has been going so well these last few years, even when some ore or lithium or some price comes off, the economy's fairly solid there. Queensland's got obviously the Olympic Games and all the infrastructure that's going to go into Queensland. New South Wales has got a little bit of momentum, but I guess when you look at the bright statistics coming out of Victoria, they tend to be, there are some statistics, and if you want to play around with the stats, you can say that Victoria's come off a low base and that its growth's been really good, you know, when you compare to sort of where it's coming from, but it's still got a long way to go. So, you know, we could sort of stick our head in the sand and be a little bit gloomy about all of that, or we could try and say, well, okay, what are the opportunities? How do we help our clients? Because most of us are in the business of advising or serving small businesses in one way or another. You know, where are the opportunities? Yes, we could sit around and have a pity party about how terrible things are and the latest tax or the latest thing that the government's done or the latest decision by some big company. But you know, what can we do about it that it's actually going to help us help our clients get better outcomes? So I'd like to just go around our panel and just ask them to briefly introduce themselves and maybe by way of an introduction, just tell us how you're engaging with your clients in this current marketplace in Victoria today, given the challenges. So just as an introduction, what it is you do and how you're engaging in this current environment. And I'll start off with Matt, on my right.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm Executive Director of Prime Financial Group, which is an ASX-listed advisory, capital and asset management firm that we've built over the last 25 years or so. And our focus has been very much around the small to medium-sized enterprise and high net worth individuals and sort of linking the two things together. So for us, we are right in the heart of, you know, the heartland of SMEs, and we are, you know, situated across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and so we're headquartered here just next door in Southgate. And so our focus is very much around, as I said, the SME marketplace, and my role is very much around that advisory piece, whether that's sort of, you know, chairing boards, advising or mentoring business owners, really supporting them on their business owner journey. So I spend most of my time sitting in front of clients and board meetings and talking about strategy, thinking about risk, all the things that you have to do responsibly around business. And it's interesting around the nuances of working in 3 different states, as Nick said a minute ago with his business. For us, you know, we see business as not necessarily state-related challenges. I see business as a business-related challenge a lot of the time. And when I do a lot of speaking and I poll audiences a lot of the time. And any time I poll an audience, you know, I ask them what's keeping them up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Because typically most business owners are up at 3 o'clock in the morning. We probably should hold these seminars at that point in time because we'll be awake thinking
Staring
about
at the ceiling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awake thinking about it.
Yeah.
But it's growth, people and cash flow. And whether you're in Victoria, New South Wales or Queensland or any other state of Australia, you know, it's very much those 3 things that are keeping most of us up at night. Obviously, the political landscape and the laws of our local laws in our states obviously impact some of those sorts of things, and we have our natural challenges, which we'll talk more about today. But, you know, we look at it from a business perspective, and yes, we have to think about the state issues, but largely I think about it from a business point of view.
Okay. All right. Gary Tesher, Pro Mentor, just a little bit of an introduction of yourself and how you're engaging in this Victorian climate.
Okay, so Pro Mentor is also national. We have people in every state. what we do is we help companies return to profit. So typically what would happen would be that we may get a referral from a bank or a finance company or whatever. They want to keep the people going, they want to keep the business going. It's not at a situation where it needs insolvency. So our job is to try and figure out what you can do to turn the business around and get it back into profit. We've been doing that for about 12 years now. Everyone in our group pretty much has run their own businesses. So they're all people in their 50s or 60s who've had real world experience, so a little bit different to a consulting firm. We do have a couple of younger guys who actually haven't run businesses, so we've got to train them. And we put them in businesses which are in a mess sometimes so that they learn fast. What we generally find interstate, or what we find in Victoria compared to every other state, in Victoria, I think it's from what we see, it's ahead of the curve. The reason for that was that the illustrious past leader Daniel Andrews spent money like a drunken sailor, and he did that probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, when he first started with all the infrastructure projects. That consumed a lot of people, and that, from what we saw at the time, pushed wages up in Victoria higher than often it was in other states. So typically the Victorians would be pinching people from Queensland or New South Wales. They'd be pinching nurses or doctors or whatever from other states as well. That pushed the wages up here. So since then, the tide has turned. A lot of the projects now are nearly finished. Typically the tunnel will be finished in probably another couple of months. All those people are coming off, the tradies are coming off. Typically again, the tunnel, the Westgate tunnel, that'll be finished before Christmas. The Footscray Hospital we're involved with as well, that'll definitely be finished before Christmas. So there's going to be a lot of people that'll be back looking for work. That's going to make things a little bit different. What we see, for example, in New South Wales is that they're just on their upward spiral at the moment. So they're pushing hard to do their tunnel projects under the Sydney Harbour Bridge, new railways and so on. That's sucking up people, which means the costs in New South Wales we're seeing now are higher in a lot of the businesses that we're involved with than what they are in Victoria, which is making it more interesting. I think that New South Wales is probably going to reach a tough period in probably maybe 6 months, I'd say. In Queensland, they're just on L plates, so they're just starting. They're trying to find people to do construction work and all the supports as well. So we think that that's going to become, right now, the new place where there won't be any insolvency and everybody will be busy, and then in 2 years' time the state government won't have any money, and then it'll go to the same as Victoria. That, as a general rule, that seems to be what's happening. That's as opposed to, say, West Australia, where West Australia is strong all the time. The only other one, the sleeping giant, I suppose, is South Australia. South Australia at the moment, employment is quite strong as well. Costs are lower than they are in the eastern states. So for manufacturers, you generally find that they're in South Australia or in Victoria, not in the other states because they're too expensive. Things are too expensive. However, they've got their projects as well. They've got 2 hospitals they don't need, which is going to cost them about $6 billion so far. By the time they're finished, it'll probably more like 10. And they're undergrounding one of their main highways, which, based on our numbers, is going to be about 50 billion. So where they're going to find all that money from is going to be interesting, and they haven't started that yet. So they'll pull away people, I guess, from Queensland. When that infrastructure's finished, they'll go to South Australia. So it's a bit of a merry-go-round, but at the end of the day, the reality is right now the costs in Victoria have come down because unemployment has gone up despite the numbers, and that's making the state a little bit more competitive. New South Wales, it's definitely going up from what we see, and Queensland's just starting, as a general, our observations anyway.
Okay, well, that's very cheerful news. It was me as a New South Wales person. All right, Paul Thompson.
Paul Thompson, Director of Fortitude Debt Advisory, commercial finance brokering specialist company, I suppose. Our main focus has always been around the M&A through to distress space. Core focus around that working capital space, which is always critical to most businesses through any sort of challenge, whether it's growth or distress or the whole way through. So probably, what we're kind of seeing at the moment is we're more seeing it's peeled away from that M&A space and more into the distress and turnaround, which is a sign of where we are as an economy in Victoria. The influx of small business restructures, the influx of VAs into Dockers. We're seeing a lot more of that as businesses try to understand and try to take control of their destiny. We're seeing a lot of sort of businesses that are struggling to sort of, move on from generation to generation, with younger kids coming in to try and run it. And as Gary knows, try to plug someone in there that has no business experience or understanding, and trying to get them to run a business is, we're seeing some disastrous things with, underquoting, no margins, running at losses, not understanding anything. But at the same time, we're now sort of at that point of the economy now where, because it has been changing over the last probably 12 to 18 months, people have already started leveraging assets, they've started leveraging everything that they can, and now it's getting to the point now where businesses are coming into us and they are very, very asset poor and highly geared, and to the point that it is going to be an interesting market where I see in the insolvency space over the next 6 months, especially for Victoria.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. I'm just scribbling down some notes for later questions. Okay, so I've got a little plan for today. We're sort of moving through, setting the scene, which I think we've done a little bit of that, identifying where the opportunities and pressures are, looking at funding and deal structuring in this environment, and also a big sort of favourite topic area of mine is collaboration and practical strategies, because in my view, certainly in the space that Paul and I operate, finance alone is never the answer just on its own. We always need to have advisors, be they lawyers or business advisors, such as Gary or Matt, I suppose, at the table as well. So we're going to move through those. I just wanted to stay with you, Paul, just before we sort of get on to the opportunities and pressures section, is just when it comes to, you mentioned some of the challenges, and I think you're right, where, we're seeing deals where the assets are fully geared, there's just nowhere to go. Yeah. And it's not like a voluntary administration or of SBR or whatever you might be thinking is going to solve the problem, because the problem is the secured debt. Yeah. So I'll be interested to speak to Gary a little bit later on about the haircut environment, because I know that that's one of something that he's always got some interesting input in. But just getting deals done. How are you finding lenders in the mainstream, I suppose, more so? Are they more cautious here than they are interstate, or what are you finding?
I love lenders here that's overpromise, under-deliver. Right. We had Westpac roll out a couple of months ago saying that they're going to start funding SMEs to pay out their tax arrears. And it's quite funny that, and I actually had a lot of people give me a call and say, and even brokers the same, give me a call, say, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? And I said, mate, I haven't bothered because I know it's not going to happen, but do me a favour, tell me when it does. And then I actually had one of my larger clients. They've got about $2.5 million worth of ATO arrears, and they had a broker come and knock on their door saying, mate, I'm going to take you to Westpac, we're going to get you funded out. And my client was yelling and screaming at me saying, mate, why don't you do this? And I said, mate, you can waste time if you like, but I don't want to. I'm telling you right now, it's one of these overpromise, under-delivers. And a lot of the banks are saying the same thing. They're saying that they want to help. They're saying that they're there for business, but realistically, this one just did not fit. And realistically, if the business was trading in a much better position, and there's nothing wrong with the business per se, it's not going to fall over tomorrow or next week or next month or even by the end of the year. So it is a viable business, but the thing is this company has grown so quickly. From when I first started engaging with them probably 4 years ago, they were at 5 mil, they're now at 45 mil. Because of the growth that they've gone through, the capital that they've had to, or the capital assets that they've had to acquire, which means the debt that's gone along with it, they're always chasing their tail. It's always been designed around that gearing. So, for lenders to say that they're willing to help, you've got to actually do it in the right way. Same with, lenders that saying that they want to fund, companies in distress. Well, they do. They do want to fund those companies in distress. But after someone like Hermes or someone else has come in there and taken the pain and ridden the higher risk part to get them through. So, they're happy to get through once that restructure's happened, once the SBR's been finalised. Once all the hard work's been done, they're happy to come in to see how it's been resolved. Or again, they're happy to fund it if there's a bucket load of assets, that it is going to solve the problem and it is going to give them something that's, as you always said, runway. You know,
But even with a bucket load of assets, your mainstream aren't.
No, the mainstream aren't. I mean, yeah, mainstream. So when I talk mainstream, these are the big four banks. Now, I probably do maybe 10% of what I do with the big four, purely because they're not geared for where business sits today. Where business sits today, it's not. So when I talk about main lenders, I'm talking about second tier lenders, you know, and then outside of that into private. So so it's not straightforward. It's not an easy market at all. You know, take a survey of brokers around Australia that specialise in asset finance, and most of them are struggling. Most of them nowadays are struggling. Compliance issues they're struggling with. General business they're struggling with. Credit decisions they're struggling with. You know, credit policies are tightening and tightening. You know, as more industries go into issues like transport, everyone's tightening up because everyone's got exposure, everyone's taking hits, everyone's having a bad time.
So I guess as a finance broker, the same thing that insolvency people say, or restructuring people, come to me early, so I've got something to play with. And I know I've seen it, and you see it all the time, is that if they come to you 3 months ago, maybe you could have done something, but you know, instead they've gone to the brokers tried to take the path of least resistance with the client, and then they finally it comes to the right home, and it's sometimes it's too late.
I had another broker just only last week give me a call, and I still get a lot of calls from brokers that I've dealt with for years, and they spoke to me about a specific client about 6-12 months ago, and I sort of gave him an indication of what he should do and the path that they should go down. You know, I told him to stop, you know, looking at a capital raise against plant and equipment. Hold that in reserve because a lot of people will lend against that and leverage that. Look at your receivables base in the first line to look at how you leverage your working capital there, rather than just chucking in a one-off hit and you've got to amortise it down. So I spoke to him about that 6 or 12 months ago, didn't go down that path, went and raised money against his assets, went and took some fintech loans, which are, you know, unsecured loans, all that sort of stuff. But right now, he came back last week saying that they've had 3 engines blow up in trucks. They can't get funding. The equipment financiers have said no, they're not interested because the business has declined a little bit, and because it's transport related, they don't want to know about it. So right now, he's sitting in a position now that he's desperate to try and work out what to do. But even where he could have been 6 or 12 months ago with his receivables funding, he's now fallen a long way down the tree because he left it to too late. He should have done it the right way, and they should have looked at it in a different light rather than just purely lending against an asset and raising capital and just doing a small little injection. So yeah, just a different way of looking at how the working capital is going to be impacted, making sure you support it long term and not just a short term, just tick and flick.
Yeah, I sometimes say to people, look, I know how this story ends. Let's just cut to the chase. Instead of going, you know, you can go around in circles. All right, look, Matt, just to sort of change the pace a little bit, I was really interested to talk to you a little bit earlier before we started. I mean, you do all sorts of, obviously advisory, strategic advisory, but also mentoring. So, you know, I'm thinking of the founder businesses. Obviously, founders are a special problem. I'm a special problem. I'm a founder as well, and I certainly know my limitations. I'm regularly reminded of them by my colleagues at work. But I mean, are there any sort of in this kind of environment that we're going through at the moment, and in Victoria? I mean, are there particular blind spots? You know, what are the sort of special needs of founders? Would you say?
It's a good question. I've spent pretty much my whole career serving business owners, and I work with the business owner first and foremost, because I know if I can get the business owner right, then the business will actually be okay. But if you don't necessarily get the business owner right, then that means that it's kind of a bit of a house of cards. So in terms of, you know, whether you're a founder or whether you're a business owner or whether you're a key person of influence in your organisation, you know, you need that sort of support. One of the things that we notice, and especially in times of trouble or distress or any of that sort of stuff, business ownership can be a very lonely existence, and a lot of people really do struggle during that period of time. And so a lot of the time they need, I probably as a young advisor, I would have thought that I had to come up with the silver bullets, meaning that I have to come up with all the strategies and I have to come up with all the answers for the businesses and for for them to grow and develop and scale. What I've recognised is that as an older advisor, is that the founders and the business owners fundamentally know the answers. They're actually inside of them because they're living this journey every particular day. And my job as an advisor is to actually create the space and time and the questioning to bring that out for those people, because to give them that clarity, to give them the space, because typically they know the direction of the path. So you talk about a blind spot. The blind spot is that they don't get into that space where they can start to be clear thinking and free and make decisions like you were talking about before, that they might have a blind spot on, going down a particular path with finance because they're not clear and because they're not thinking about the future and the direction of the organisation, because it's still caught up in that sort of day-to-day, and they need somebody to actually lift them out of that particular space. So it's once you do that, and you've heard the adage a million times, work on the business rather than in the business, which is fundamentally impossible, especially when you're going through difficult times. But finding somebody that you can actually create that space for you, hold the space, and then allow you to free you up to make some clear decisions and understand that's probably the most important thing from my point of view, and where I enjoy most of my time, because it is a lonely existence. I'm a business owner. I've been a business owner all my life as well. I know how hard it is, because at the top there's not really people you can actually talk to at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So having that, and as brokers and advisors, and we hold a special place, and one that I'm reasonably humbled about every day, because people let us into their lives and want our support and our help, and what we can do for them is really support them as individuals to allow them to actually build businesses. I have this philosophy that I think that business owners and founders should be treated like high-performing athletes. You think about a high-performing athlete, and you think about the fact that they've got all these coaches around them, all these people around them to support them, whether they're nutritionists or performance or mindset. I think being in business is we've got to stay at a very high level all the time, consistently, and every day we get up, and we're leaders in our organisations, we can't have bad days. So from my point of view, we need to surround the business owner with all that support to allow them to operate at that high level, which therefore creates the ability to operate a really high functioning organisation as well. So I think that, going back to the question about blind spot, I think it's that clarity and that support to have a conversation with somebody who might be able to direct them and give them the clear space so they can make the informed decision, because intuitively they know the answer.
It's very, very interesting. You say it's lonely at the top. It is hard for people, the owner-founder, to have someone that they can have the right conversations with. I guess they get in their own little bubble of their own little reality bubble, and it's hard to have that sense check. And I often say that commercial finance brokers, they play the role these days that, and accountants as well, but from the broker's perspective, they play the role that the bank manager used to play, because it is the commercial broker that's got that relationship for years. Sometimes you talk to a broker and they've got a client. You say, how long have you had that client? I've had that client for 15 years. And then if you were to say to that client, how many bank managers have you had? And can you even name your current bank manager? No chance. But there used to be that sort of external advisor or even just a sounding board. I'm interested because when you talk about that and creating the space, I know what it's like. I just don't have time, because if I take my eyes off the, I had a colleague who used to once say that running a business is like it's like killing orcs. In Lord of the Rings, they're easy to kill. You just got to keep swinging the sword, but as soon as you stop swinging, they overrun you, and that's what it feels a little bit like. Is to create, you've got to keep swinging at those orcs. But what about if you've got to tell someone, give them the sort of the advice that they may not necessarily want to hear? You can see that they're caught up, in orc killing or whatever it is, and you've got to deal with maybe souring the relationship. I know commercial brokers, and I know there's some insolvency people in the room here as well. You know, the client will opinion shop. You know, it's almost like shopping for a doctor that's going to give you the right answer. Have you seen that? I mean, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's like, I don't want to have to cut off my arm to save my life. Well, and so then they go to the next guy that maybe tells them something different, but it's not the right answer. And you've lost a client, you know, which is a bit mercenary, but that's a fact.
I think that we have a responsibility as advisors, and you know, not just telling people what they want to hear, but sometimes we have to have the hard conversations. My approach and my style has always been that, you know, from an empathetic perspective, that I'm a business owner, you're a business owner, we're no different. The challenges that we've got are the same. So I think, you know, coming from an empathetic approach to their particular situation or plight can often help, at least. So by you understanding their situation, identifying it, and probably being on part of it yourself if you've been a business owner, recognises that hey, here's where we're currently at the moment. Here's our different options that we can go down the path of. These are the you know, the benefits or the challenges of each particular choice. I think if you, rather than just give a solution and rather than giving an answer and just tell, if you can start to be solution orientated and like we said before, lift them up so they can make the decisions themselves, but they're informed decisions. They're not decisions that you just say, hey, this is the answer or that's the answer, because you've got this years of experience where you can actually do that, because we're all the experts or an expert in what we do. But, you know, and yes, when we go to a doctor, we assume we're going to get the best level of care, and we do shop it if we're not happy with the answer. But the relationship that you form with the people that ask you to questions, I think is very much around education. So educating them so they can make an informed decision themselves, I think, is probably the key to how I manage it now. And some people are open to knowledge, and some people are open to thinking about things, and other people are very closed-minded. So the other trick is that if you're dealing with a closed-minded person, I suppose identify it early by trying to educate. If they're not listening and then they go to shop, well, they shop. That's just the prerogative of the person. But from my point of view, education is the key to reducing that difficulty in what you're talking about.
I guess.
Sorry, it's funny you say that, because especially with accountants, when I see businesses sort of evolving, and I talk to them a lot about this, because you can see a business is getting to a point, but they're not getting the right support or the right advice from their accountant. And it's quite interesting when I try to push that and drive that to sort of say, look, maybe it's time to have a review or have a chat with someone else that can potentially add some value or benefit back to your business in terms of direction and strategy and things like that. It's interesting to say that, you know, people are happy to sit there and say, but this has been my accountant since, you know, for 10 or 15 years now. You know, I don't want to change. I know them, they know me. I'm just happy just doing that. They're the suburban little accountant. They're not costing me a lot of money. But when you start seeing that these tax implications and everything else mounting up and no one else is doing anything around it, it's quite hard to sit there and swallow and sort of look at when you've got someone, you know, or firms like yourselves that are happy to work with clients to sort of put in strategies to look at different things or make hard conversations or give suggestions. A lot of accountants are just sitting there just crunching numbers.
Correct, and it's a frustration of mine over the years where, you know, I'll sit in front of a business and I'll say, you know, talk to me about your advisory people around you, and they say, I've got my accountant and I've got my lawyer and I've got this, and I go, talk to me about your relationship with the accountant. Oh, he's a great guy, or he's a great lady. You know, I trust him. He's really good. Okay, sorry, I trust him. I said, does he do a good job? No, he does an okay job. And I go, okay, so that's kind of cool. You know, he does an okay job. I said, so this is your biggest asset, your business right now, and it's going to fund your retirement and your living and all that sort of stuff. And you're happy to leave it with a person that does an okay job, right? That makes no sense to me. If this is, you know, would you do that with, you know, with any other asset that you've actually got in your life, to actually leave it with a person that does an okay job? just because of the fact that you have a relationship with them. The other barrier is that people think they can't change because that person knows everything about my life. But seriously, I've done this job for as an accountant for an advisory firm for 30 years. You can pretty much learn something within a week to 2 weeks max, right? So so it is a bugbear and frustration, exactly what you're talking about. But all you can do is offer, open, and then challenge them about what they're actually doing and why they're making that particular decision.
I think that your analogy of the high-performing athlete is a good one, because if the high-performing athlete said, "How's your nutritionist?" "Oh, they're okay."
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to work, is it?
Exactly.
You're not going to be a high-performing athlete for very long. Gary, I guess you're just looking at it. You give a lot of operational and advice, as well as strategic, obviously. I mean, just reflecting on Matt's comments there, but sort of thinking more in operational terms. I mean, what are the sort of I guess what are the markers for success in a Victorian environment that when you're looking at a situation, there's some guides whether you think, this can be a successful turnaround?
Yeah, I think in most cases they can, or most of the ones that we get, they can, because generally speaking, the people that refer them back to us do understand the businesses at a high level, at least, and understand there's something there. The comment about the hard discussions, we have them just about with all our clients, because for whatever reasons they've done something which may or may not make logical sense. Typically the sort of things that companies would do would be they'd say, well, we need all these extra people as a typical example because we're going to have this astronomical growth and we're not going to be able to find the people. But the problem is they don't have the astronomical growth, and where they are today they can't afford to have all those people. They don't want to let them go. And it really needs a third party externally to explain to them, well, if you're going to keep doing that, then you're going to be in deep trouble because you're not going to have enough money to pay the wages and so on. So people, generally speaking, the ones that we see, there is a core business there, but what's happened is they've become overly optimistic about the future and unrealistic about how to run or how to make ends meet today. That's generally what we see as a general rule of thumb. The other one, which is what you brought up before about debt, typically what we see with the banks is that the banks don't like appointing. What happened is because they got dragged through the Banking Royal Commission back in 2020 or whatever, they've become very, very gun shy. They've also done internal calculations. I've seen one of the 4 banks' internal calculations in terms of how much it costs to appoint and all the indemnities they have to give. And then they have what they call the indirect number, which is the number that if it ends up on the front page of a newspaper, how much more it costs them in terms of PR damage and so on. So off the back of all of that, they're very, very reluctant to appoint. So their view on life is, let's just see if we can, quote unquote, pass the parcel. So what they will do is they'll have a look at the amount of debt. They'll then say, we want this business to survive. They'll encourage the owners, go and look for a few other people. They may even have a list of names. And they'll say, go talk to these people. They may be able to refinance you. And if they do that, then we'd be interested in having a discussion about how much debt you really do owe us or how much debt we're prepared to take a hit on. We've got 3 like that right now, where the companies themselves, there is a core business there. They can't afford the debt for whatever reasons. And the banks are saying, look, we'd rather that we cut our losses now and we get out rather than appoint, or rather than these companies keep struggling along, which has an internal cost to them as well, which these days is very high in terms of managing the client internally, the amount of capital they have to put aside, and more importantly, from a banker's point of view, the risk that they face in terms of then ending up at the Banking Royal Commission or being on the front page of a newspaper, which probably counts for more than all the other things I talked about.
You'd have some special challenges, Gary, because you might be referred in by the bank. So, the sort of enemy has referred you in, and you've got to overcome that challenge. But you're not the one carrying the stick. You're the I guess how does that go?
Well, it's tricky.
Yeah.
So quite often what will happen is we are, as Nick says, we are seen as the enemy. However, there's 2 parts to that equation. One part is that the company at the end of the day has to agree to engage us, not the bank. Sometimes the banks say, oh, look, these people employ a lot of people, so we want to do something about it, we want to help them out, da-da-da-da. But generally speaking, we found that if we're engaged by a bank, then you're seen as the enemy, you're seen as a spy within the business, and they really want you out and they want to do something else.
Well, I tell you, it could be worse, couldn't it? Because it's Gary Tasher from ProMentor who's trying to operationally help you. It could be such and such a partner from such and such insolvency division of an accounting firm.
That's what they normally do.
Yeah. It's interesting, I got a deal across my desk the other day. It was referred to me by a lawyer. And the lawyer said to me, these guys are doing a divestment of one of their divisions and they're doing a strategic realignment and they're great business, but the bank doesn't like where they're going and so they need to refinance. Right? So I've set the scene, divestment, strategic realignment and the bank. Now, once I get into it, it's kind of the other way around. Bank doesn't like the business and they're kind of forced to strategic divest because they've got to get some capital on the balance sheet. Now, I've done the thing of, what do I do? These guys look in the mirror and they're seeing the fairest in the land. And it's not quite, I've been around, I'm 61. I don't, I just tell it the way it is. It's like, guys, here's where I think you are. I think that where this game ends is having a discussion with the bank about a haircut. Now, can you imagine the shock to the system where they're going, capital raise and divestment, and I'm going, I think this ends. So anyway, I've said it. They haven't called me back since I said that. But hopefully, that's where it ends up. All right, look, Paul, I know that the first piece of advice you want to give any finance broker who's got a tough deal is to give it to you.
No, actually, no. I actually point him in a direction to go talk to a lender instead.
No, but maybe I'm just hoping if you can share some of the secret sauce. What is it that obviously, we love seeing deals.
Yeah.
But they also want to navigate maybe some of the more mainstream options. I mean, what do you tell brokers about presenting deals to get them done? In this environment.
Yep. So for me, when I'm talking to them, it's always around, especially when there is, most of the stuff we're talking about now is distress, and that's where most of the guys are coming to me, sort of wanting to know what I do and how I do it. So most of it realistically is looking at your exit strategy. Like, it's great to present a deal to a financier to say, look, I've got a company that's realistically in the shit. Okay, there's no sugarcoating it. They're borderline about to fall over.
A warning on my YouTube.
You will, I know. I wanted to drop it in there because I wanted to sort of have some sort of disclaimer in there. So look, most of it is around the exit. You've got to understand what that exit looks like. Are you essentially asking a funder to kick a can down the road for 3 to 6 months, or is there honestly something in this business? So don't just look at the business. If the business has a turnaround option, has a strategy, fantastic. How are they going to implement it and how are they going to get out of it? And then how are you going to get your current lender out of it to escalate it up? Because, a lot of the stuff, as I said, 10% of what I'm doing is banks. So where do you want a client to end up? You want the client to end up in the banking. That's where ultimately all clients want to be. Regardless of, I've got one at the moment, which I know Gary's involved at the same time. They are in a world of hurt. They're in arrears with every single lender that they've got on the books, but they're still asking me for 6% interest rates on a capital raise. So, the mindset of someone to understand where we need to be today, what funding we need to get, but what is the exit strategy and what is the path to return to normality, essentially. That's my strategy. That's how I go in, and that's how I sort of present to clients to say, look, you've got to understand where you are today. You've got to understand where your business is. You've got to understand the mistakes of the past or the issues of the past and how you're going to overcome those. Now, a lot of that is also to bringing in, accountants or advisors or things like that to make sure that the client, their focus and their dream of where they want to get to can actually turn into reality. It's funny where I've got a large commercial cabinet maker. He's got these ideas, he's got all these clients lined up, he's got all these contracts, but I brought in a specialist for the construction industry just to do a review of his contracts and what he was doing. His margins were so fine he didn't even realise. He was looking at it and he was running off prices that he hadn't even looked at. He hadn't looked at his supply price. He hadn't looked at anything. He hadn't looked at the cost of finance on how he actually accelerates that growth. His expectation was, the money will just come in. I'll be able to sort it out, or creditors will just extend me credit. But the problem was he didn't actually look at that. He just had a whole bunch of assumptions on how he'd get there. So for me, looking at deals and how I present deals and how I think about things, it's all about, can this actually be turned into realistic an outcome, and who's going to help them along the journey? Because I can only do my part, but I need other people around them to do their part as well. So
it's interesting. I mean, there needs to be that reality piece. And I was talking to a broker yesterday. He's got for us quite a large transaction, $11 million. And, again, the client, obviously, they've had a long-standing business, but they've just got themselves in this corner. And, okay, well, you're going to be with us for 12 months. You're going to, in the meantime, you're going to sell off this a particular property and, but then, hopefully, everything's going to be very nice. And you'll be able to go back to Westpac or CBA, whoever it is. It's only a transitory thing. All right, look, I want to ask everybody one more question. Believe it or not, time marches on. And then I'd like to throw to the floor and see if you've got any questions. So, Matt, I'm going to start with you. And I want to we've talked a little bit about doom and gloom here. I'm trying to sort of keep this upbeat, But looking ahead, and we're talking about, our audience is commercial finance brokers.
Yeah.
How would you advise commercial finance brokers to position themselves with other advisors? As I said to you, a big thing with me is collaboration. How can they position themselves with other advisors, to help make sure that, I guess, the client's getting the right long-term conversations, and also that the commercial finance brokers are part of those conversations as well?
So very much I work with people around uniqueness, because fundamentally we're in a competitive market. So there's lots of us in the marketplace from that point of view. And so how do you actually stand out? And so for me, I work a lot with these people around this concept of saying, well, why would you choose me? Or why would you collaborate with me? Or why would you work for me? Sort of type thing. So codifying that in your organisation is super important, because then I know if I'm a referrer, or if I'm a collaborator, or if I'm a potential client of you, I know I want to come to you for a particular reason. Okay, so being clear about what you do and who you are and what you stand for and why you exist is super important. A lot of us get caught up in the what we do and how we do it. Okay, not a lot of us talk about the why we do something, and the why we do something is that purpose piece, and that piece is the one that resonates the most. And there's science behind it around the different parts of your brain and and how we make decisions through gut feel and those sorts of type things. But it's aligning that piece for your decision-making process to say, I'm going to be aligned with, go with, work for this particular organisation because I feel connected to them, and you feel that connection through that purpose, that why, and that uniqueness, not just about what you do and how you do it. Because if you have to differentiate between what you do and how you do it, very hard in a very competitive marketplace. So therefore, there's got to be you've got to be very clear about your niche, which is important, and about what you actually target and go after, but why you exist and why we would want to connect together in terms of doing something in business together. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Is it Stephen Seneca, or what's his name? All about the why.
Yeah.
Stephen?
No, it's it's
Simon.
Simon Sinek.
So
I do a lot of that sort of type work, and it talks about the different parts of the brain, about the neocortex part of your brain, which is all rational thinking, and your limbic part of your brain, which is all about sort of emotive, and that's where your gut feels sort of fundamentally stored. So they're the sorts of things. I know this sounds a little bit sort of unique or different, but from my experiences, that's where you make the biggest difference, and that's where you get the most amount of work and support and collaboration and referral, because people are very clear and they're connected about what you're doing.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to come to you last, Paul. I want to just I've actually got two questions for you, Gary. I'm sorry. I'm just going to ask you to sort of move through them if you can. Just on the subject of just quickly on the subject of haircuts with banks and how approachable you think they are, and just I was just wondering, when you're scrolling through industries before, are you doing a bit of work in the defence industry, or what is? That's another story. That's another story. So we'll leave that for another day, maybe. All right. Well, just talk about how you work with brokers, like how you collaborate with them, and maybe just if you touch on bank haircuts as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I can, without mentioning names, I can talk about one which is a business that operates hotels. In hotels, so they had, I think, 5 hotels in the CBD, so they were management operations, so they managed the hotels. All the rooms were, in 2 of the hotels they were franchised. So the problem was that the group involved, they bought the hotel or bought the franchise rights just before COVID, so they paid too much, but at the time, based on the performance just before COVID, it was fine. After COVID, needless to say, the rooms weren't full, so they were making losses. They couldn't afford to pay, in this case, one of the banks, I won't say which one of the 4, and they were struggling month after month after month. So the bank took a view at the time that because these people employed X amount in each of the hotels, cleaners and so on, there was quite a few employees, they didn't want that business to go under. They thought, or they realised that the debt was too high. To start with, they gave them a holiday, so they said, don't pay us anything, see if you can get your act together and see if you can turn the business around, and we'll just write off what you haven't paid. We'll write off the interest payments that you haven't paid, or leave it just as the straight principal that was still left owing. Then they figured after about another year or 2 years, which comes back to Nick's point, that Victoria's a bigger mess in terms of hotel accommodation, particularly in the CBD, it still is. So what they did then was they said, no, the best thing for us to do is we'd rather that we're prepared to do a deal in terms of debt. You guys need to see what you can do to try and find somebody else to take it out. So then we talked to a few people that we know, so brokers or whatever. So we talked to Paul, obviously, and a few others, and say, can you help these guys out? And then they'd see what they could do. In the end, in that particular instance, it was the accounting firm that they used, an external accounting firm. They had some mates in their high net worths, and they took the debt off the bank at the time, and I think the bank took a fairly big haircut. It was about 40 or 45 cents in the dollar, something like that.
A haircut, or what they accepted?
What they accepted. Yeah. And the reason it was so high, or 2 reasons. One is they felt a little bit guilty in the first place that they allowed that business to have so much debt before COVID, because if you did the numbers even before COVID, they would have been struggling to pay it back. And clearly after COVID they didn't. And then the second, which was really interesting, was the fear of the Banking Royal Commission, that they would find that out, that those guys hadn't done it. And off the back of that, again, same thing, they said, no, we're out of here. We've seen another one like that in agriculture, same problem, and particularly with the current lack of water everywhere, except maybe in parts of New South Wales where you've got too much. The farmers are all struggling. Again, in some instances, the banks have said, in one we know of anyway, the bank has said no. They allowed these guys to buy, I think it was 3 dairy farms. They combined into 4. We got involved in the processing plant as well. They had a little processing plant, and they decided the debt was too high, and they did find another bank, or not a bank, a second tier bank, to take them out. And they took a haircut, I think, again, of about 30 or 35 cents in the dollar, something like that.
That's what they accepted, was 35 cents.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
There's a huge reduction. And the reason for that was that they didn't want to go to farm mediation, because for whatever reason they felt that if they went to farm mediation, they get hammered, because they shouldn't have allowed them to buy these other properties prior. They got a little bit carried away. And the whole deal just didn't make any sense based on milk prices and so on, even at that time. At that time, it was a pretty marginal deal.
It's interesting. I mean, there's still a lot of money around, particularly in the private credit markets. That's another story that we won't get into right now. But okay, Paul, just before we quickly throw to questions, just anything, advice that you might have for brokers? As we said, one of the ways of addressing the challenges in the Victorian market in particular is to make sure you're collaborating with the right team around you. How does a broker go about finding the right team?
Well, realistically, it's just diversification of your network. Not just looking at, if we use an asset finance broker as an example, don't just look at, aligning yourself with dealers or equipment suppliers or things like that. You've got to look at the bigger picture. Diversify outside of your comfort zone on a product type. Stick to your commercial because that's what you know, but look at the other aspects of the business to help your clients. So, especially nowadays where we are at the moment, that's probably the big thing. Checking in on a business as a health check, not just asking, do they need any other finance, but just business as general. Realistically, that's just the thing. Just ask the question: how's business? How's things going? What can we do to help? But then have a network sitting behind you of accountants, of solicitors, of business advisors, of people that can actually add benefit back. Because, one thing that I've found that clients love is when you add benefit as opposed to just adding funding. If you're adding benefit for no good reason, for yourself, there's no benefit in it for me. But if I can help a business survive, and that's the biggest thing for me. If you can help a business,
the right person.
If you can help a business today or tomorrow through a hard time, fantastic. They'll come back and see you another time.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I just wonder if we've got any questions from the floor. Anyone has anything they'd like to ask?
And they'll tell their friends about you.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's always That's look. That's what we hope for. We always hope for those referrals, but the key thing is just help where you can.
What are they saying? BNI givers gain or something? It is there saying? That's true. Anyway, anything else?
Given the current kind of malaise in Victoria's government kind of sector, and I've kind of heard recently about redundancies being offered through our government. Yep. What are they doing to encourage business in Victoria? Are they actually doing anything regarding R&D grants of any kind? Or have they just pulled their head in entirely?
Specifically in Victoria, I'm not across, the latest in grants. We used to do a lot of work in that particular space. We do a lot of work in the R&D tax incentive space in our firm. So, but that's federal, not necessarily state-based, and that's been around for 30 years, and it's actually quite a good program from that point of view. So, I'm always scanning, to see what the landscape is, but because of the fact that Victoria isn't in a very good financial state, a lot of the funding starts to dry up a little bit, and a lot of the proactiveness. If we go to Queensland, for example, there's a lot more proactiveness in the grant space than there is in Victoria. The same with New South Wales, and it coincides with how much money they've got, because it comes down to a budgetary, equation to say, well, how much tax and money are coming in and how much interest is going out and how much is left to actually, beyond, infrastructure to ensure that, we can operate as a state. And because of that, a lot of the grants aren't as available as they are in other states for that particular reason. But there's been other times when Victoria has been flush, that there has been, from that point of view. So we look for federal rather than state to support us from that. But there is certainly certain sectors like advanced manufacturing, obviously has some support from that point of view. But I'm certainly not seeing the same level that we've seen historically. And yes, other states have got more money can invest from that point of view. It is there, but not as much as it has been historically, and maybe look at federal rather than state to get some support.
And is there a catastrophe coming with the wind-up of these major projects that have occurred, and what kind of form is that catastrophe going to take? Is it going to be significantly painful in Victoria once these big projects are done?
I'd like to add to that question, actually, if you don't mind, and how mobile is the capital and labour force as well?
So to answer the first part of the question, there'll be a lot of tradies that'll be looking for work, probably early next year, I'd say. Having said that, most of those tradies have already got jobs lined up in Queensland because the infrastructure there's gone crazy. So I don't think there'll be much impact on that. The second question is this housing thing, which is really quite annoying, and that is the lack of housing. That's not true. There's companies around which we work with, they do 3D printing, so what they do in essence is they can build a house in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks max. The problem's not housing per se or construction of housing per se. The problem again is the government, which the productivity guys tried to address. The reason for that is that all you have to do, if you look in Victoria, which is a really good example of bad management, and that is that in the outer suburbs, they've decided they'll build lots of houses, which is what they do. However, there's this thing called infrastructure, which is roads, which they don't do, which is railways, which they don't do, which is power, which they don't do, and which is sewerage, which they don't do. So by the time they get around to doing all those bits and pieces, that's the delay, and that's the real reason why there's a housing crisis. And that's not only in Victoria, that's an Australia-wide problem.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's interesting. In Sydney, we've got the new metro line, and there's these little metropolises popping up all over the place, which is going towards that. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think we will wrap up. It's been a real privilege for me to have such esteemed panellists, starting with Matt Murphy. Thank you very much, Matt. Really interesting hearing what you had to say, and very interesting meeting you early on. So a rare privilege to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Gary Tesher. It's always a privilege to have Gary, who looks at things very differently with his background. And Paul Thompson, long-term friend of Hermes Capital, and very experienced, and always very good to hear what you've got to say, Paul. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.